Okay, so Romney wins, but then he faces this huge Democratic legislature. We've already talked about that. So going forward, George Romney has to look at if I am going to be interested possibly in the presidency, I got to show people that I'm just not lonesome George who can manage to survive myself against some bad things happening elsewhere to Republicans on the ticket. I've got to show I can pull Republicans into office on my coattails, right?
That's right.
And so we're leading up to 1966, which I think many Republicans at that time and even in years since regard as almost the golden year for the Republican Party, because as far down as the Republican Party was in 1965 and 66 based on 64, they came roaring back in 66. What part did the ticket splitter play in that? Or was it just kind of overcome by George Romney's coattails?
It was a combination. We put together in 1966 what we call the Action Team, where Romney did not run just as an individual. He ran with candidate Bob
Griffin, U.S. Senate, Bill Milliken as lieutenant governor.
Right, for the candidates, for the state administrative board, for the legislature. And at that time, the national press was saying, if Romney can win those offices as well as congressional seats, then he'll be, quote, a real possibility for president. Well, he not only won that and the Senate and the 5 congressional districts and the legislature, but did far more than what people were anticipating. And I think that in many ways set him up as a possible presidential candidate for that election.
Yeah, I think absolutely. Some of the comments from the national commentators almost set him up to fail, like setting the bar so high. It was like, are you kidding? He's not going to be able to do this. But then he did it, right?
Well, he poured all the resources into a team effort rather than spending it all on himself.
Do you think he had that strong feeling himself that, this is going to help him personally in terms of his presidential ambitions? Or did he feel, honestly, like, for instance, I tried to get along with this Democratic legislature in 1965, 66, but I'd really rather have Republicans controlling things there? Even though there may be some Republicans I'm not exactly in sync with. What do you think?
I don't have an answer for that, Bill. I don't know.
Well, anyway,
I suspect it was, we knew that he was going to win, all right? There was no doubt about that. So then the question becomes, well, do you spend all your resources on him and make it a huge win? Or do you try to pull in other people with you as well?
Right.
And the decision was, let's pull as many Republicans as we can into this win. And it worked.
And it worked. Okay, we get to 1967. Now that was a very important year, as you probably know. You had the Detroit riot. You had the passage of Michigan's first income tax. You had George Romney going on a TV show in Detroit and claiming he was brainwashed in Vietnam. I mean, all these things happened within a couple of months of each other in the summer of 1967. What do you remember? Let's start with the Detroit riot. What do you remember about the Detroit riot that really sticks out in your mind?
They were disastrous. And after it was over, the governor put me in charge of a task force consisting of the state police, the Detroit police, the sheriffs, and so on. One of the first things we discovered in looking at it is that they couldn't even communicate with each other because of different frequencies on their radio. So there was no way for the National Guard to talk to the police and so on, which was just really just bad planning. The second point, though, was the way President Johnson got involved in that thing and wouldn't help us. We kept asking for him to send, to federalize the National Guard, and he wouldn't do it.
He wouldn't do it.
No, he wouldn't do it. But that was because Johnson in the polls against Romney was losing, or very close. Johnson also, I was audited 3 times by the IRS in 1965, 66, and 67 because I think Johnson ordered the Romney staff to be audited. And there was
You were yourself.
Yeah, there was no reason for me to be audited. I mean, how much money can you make in the office of the governor? But it was a tragic situation, and we were not prepared for it. Just totally unprepared, not just at the state level, but particularly at the local level.
Did anything come out of the Detroit riot that was in any way, shape, or form good, or resulted in anything positive?
I think it raised the awareness of the people in the state about race relations and how bad they were in the Detroit area, as well as, of course, statewide. But beyond that, I'm not certain as to what I could say was really positive.
What about the state income tax? Now, did you work on that behind the scenes? And what was Romney's attitude at the time you finally got it passed? Because he actually had been a supporter of the idea of what he called fiscal integrity. I remember him giving speeches and saying that Michigan's tax structure was skewed and inequitable and needed to be reformed, but that part of any reform should be an income tax, which of course to some people is anathema. They just, knee-jerk reflex saying, no way, no income tax. So how did you deal with that? How did he deal with that?
I think it was a unique effort. What we did is invite legislators, Republican legislators, to come up to Mackinac Island. We flew them up there, and they would stay in what's called the commissioner's cottages or even in the governor's residence. And then the governor would take a morning or an afternoon and brief them on the income tax and what it meant. And of course, then the rest of the staff would entertain them at night, down at the local saloon, where we would sing and drink and so on. But the point was that he had invited these legislators up to his own mansion or residence on the island to talk with them. That was the basis of it.
Yeah.
And I think that really worked. Because by the time they left, the governor would ask them, well, how do you feel about the income tax now? And many of them were convinced by this special kind of lobbying effort where you get legislators by themselves, get them out of Lansing,
right,
up there. And I think that was one of the reasons we got it passed. Not just that, but...
Right. Well, it was kind of remarkable that it was a Republican majority legislature that actually passed it with a Republican governor, when it was the Republican Party that really mainly was the party resistant to an income tax at all up to that time. You had G. Menon Soapy Williams, the Democratic governor, all during the 50s saying, hey, let's have an income tax here. And the Republican legislature wouldn't listen to him. So finally, Romney, after 5 years, gets it, and it's in effect. Well, okay, so Romney at this point is starting to get organized for a presidential campaign. And he goes on this Lou Gordon TV show in Detroit.
Yeah.
And the subject of Vietnam comes up, and Romney had gone on a trip to Vietnam, as I understand it.
Yes.
And basically he said on the Gordon show, whatever I thought or believed about American policy on Vietnam in the past, I'm changing my mind. I mean, I think we were just brainwashed. I was brainwashed. And of course, I'm not sure the governor understood that brainwash at that time was really kind of a taboo word. Kind of extends from the Korean War, in which I think you participated.
Yes.
The Manchurian Candidate, we remember the movie. And what happened as far as you were concerned with George Romney? Were you surprised? Did you wonder what happened? Why did he say this? What do you think?
We were absolutely stunned and shocked because none of us on the Romney staff had ever heard him use the word or the concept of brainwashed. And for those of us who had been in Korea, we knew what that meant. And then for a while, nothing seemed to happen. Charlie Harmon was all upset about it, and others. And then sooner, probably within a week or two, one of the national reporters picked it up, and pretty soon they had all picked it up. And they kept running with it, saying, well, this proves that he can't be president if he can be brainwashed by the generals in Vietnam. It was a critical moment in the campaign because from that point on, in the polls at least, Romney was starting to lose to Johnson, where up to that point, he was even, or in some cases even stronger than Johnson had been.
Right. Charlie Harmon was the press secretary at that point,
Yeah.
right? It succeeded Dick Milliman. Isn't it perhaps true that Romney and maybe other governors, if they weren't brainwashed, President Johnson certainly tried very hard to brainwash them, didn't he? He
Yes.
made a supreme effort.
Every time the governors met in the National Governors Conference, Johnson would send the Secretary of Defense or somebody from his administration, or he would come himself to argue that we need to send more troops to Vietnam. And you could almost always tell when the president was thinking about sending more troops because he'd be lobbying the governors to get a resolution supporting what he had done. And the governors did this for several years. And then all of a sudden, Romney and Governor Hatfield of Oregon said, hey, wait a minute. This doesn't make any sense. So they started the opposition to Johnson. But I can remember the National Governors Conference was held on a ship, the SS Independence, and we sailed from New York to the Virgin Islands with all the governors, all the national press, and Johnson would send a helicopter to the ship, and they would land and they come out and greet the governors and say, now you've got to support what he's doing in Vietnam.
Didn't they have a meeting in Omaha too, the governors?
Romney was on the executive committee of the National Governors Conference, and we were in Omaha. And in the middle of this conference, they get a telephone call from Johnson. I want y'all to come down to the ranch. So he sent an Air Force plane, and we all flew from Omaha down to the ranch in Texas.
You went down too?
Yeah. And there again was another briefing on Vietnam to get them to support it, but a couple of other things happened. We were sitting around this huge, round, Lazy Susan kind of a table.
Yeah.
And Johnson says, I've had several paintings made of myself. Now, he said, I'd like to show them to you, and you tell me which are the best. Well, here sits Governor Rockefeller, Governor Romney, Governor Scranton, all these potential Republican candidates against Johnson, and he's asking them to decide which oil painting was the best. And they're all hemming and hawing. Then he gave them all a big 10-gallon hat. He said, now look inside the hat. And if you looked inside the hat, there was a map of Texas. But the Johnson Ranch covered 3/4 of the thing, and he wanted them to wear these hats. And then the next day he took them out hunting. Well, George Romney, I don't think had ever hunted in his life, and they put him up here in this tree, sitting there waiting for deer to come by. I don't think the guy would have fired a gun if he'd even seen him. But that was Johnson took Romney around in his white Lincoln, drove around the ranch, and we could see all that stuff. It's a digression, but that's how much Johnson lobbied the governors to get their support.